I did not stop to watch her fall. That is the thing I returned to in the months after, not the arrows, not the screaming at the river's edge, not the way my mark came alive on my wrist for the first time in 11 years. I returned to the fact that I did not stop to watch. I was already moving. The Vale River Festival comes in the last warm days before the cold sets in, and it fills the Stone Quay along the river's south bank with every family in Thornville who can make the walk. Merchants from the Delta towns set up cloth-covered stalls along the quayside. River fishers bring their catch-up from the lower holds and sell it still gleaming. Children run the gaps between the booths while their mothers call after them, and the smell of wood smoke and frying river bread and rivermint drying in tied bundles hangs over everything. It is the one day of the season when the city forgets to be a city and becomes, briefly, something older and warmer. I have always walked the festival on foot, without a procession. My guard captain, Bren, walks 10 paces behind me, which is his compromise between my preference for moving freely and his conviction that a king who moves freely is a king who will eventually get himself killed. He is probably right. I have not told him that. My ward, Myra, is 7 years old and has the disposition of someone who has already decided that rules apply to other people. She had slipped her escort before the morning bell. I know this the way I know most things that happen within the festival grounds. Someone tells me eventually, when the consequence has already arrived. The escort, a young pack guard named Solith who had been assigned to Myra for 6 weeks and had not yet fully grasped what he was dealing with, found me at the top of the quay steps at mid-morning with the expression of a man who has failed at something and cannot decide whether to confess it or hope it resolves itself. I sent 3 more guards into the crowd to find her and went on walking, because Myra had been running free at the festival since she was 4 and had never once come to harm. And the thing you learn about a child like Myra is that containing her requires more effort than she is willing to reward. She found the fish stall, as she always did. I knew this because Doval, the river fish merchant who has held the same spot on the quay for 30 years, flagged me down as I passed his stall and told me, with the fond resignation of a man who has accepted that this child is simply part of his festival, that Myra had spent 20 minutes telling his cat about the fish she'd seen in the lower holds and had then drifted toward the south end of the quay. His cat, Fenwick, had listened with every appearance of serious attention. I thanked him and moved on. The south end of the quay is where the smaller traders set up, the herb sellers, the cloth dyers, the basket weavers who come in from the River Plain settlements east of the city. I had noticed, in a peripheral way, that a new stall had appeared there over the past 3 weeks. A worn cloth spread on a trestle, bundles of pressed rivermint in careful rows, a few pottery jars of dried herbs whose names I didn't know, and a woman behind it who moved with the economical quiet of someone accustomed to taking up as little space as possible. I had not thought about her in any particular way. My border registry had logged her 3 months ago. Senna of the Plains, no house, no allegiance, medicinal trade. She had paid the border fee and been given a trader's pass, and that was the end of it. She was one of several hundred people who pass through Thornville's gates each season looking for a few weeks' work before moving on. I passed her stall twice that morning. I did not stop. The attack came at midday. I was standing at the upper end of the quay, near the stone steps that lead up to the Citadel's lower gate, watching a group of children race paper boats in the shallows. The crowd on the quay was at its thickest. Families pressed together at the railing, merchants calling out from their stalls, the noise of it layered and bright in the way festival noise is, so that at first I did not separate the specific sound from everything else around it. Anyone who has spent time in a war knows the sound, the particular split of the air above a crowd when something is loosed from a height on the far bank, aimed into a density of people. I heard it once, and my body recognized it before my mind did. I heard it twice before I had turned and found the direction. I heard it 3 times and I was already moving through the crowd, shouldering through because there was no other way, because the press of people was solid, and I was pushing against the direction of everyone else who had heard something, and was starting to understand that they should move away from it. I heard the fourth one, as I was still 10 paces away. What I saw, in the fraction of a moment before I reached her, Myra, standing at the railing near the water, frozen the way a child freezes when something has happened that is too large to process. And 3 steps away from Myra, a woman in a plainsworker's cloth moving, not running, not diving, but crossing that space with a terrible controlled speed. The kind of speed that comes when a person has already decided, and the decision is so complete that there is no fear left in it, only the forward motion of someone going where they are going. She reached Myra. She curved herself over the child the way you would shelter something you had been carrying your whole life, and I heard the impact of the arrows, not the sound I expected, not the sound from a war, but something more muffled and wrong. And then she was on the ground and Myra was beneath her, and I was there. My mark burned. It went from nothing to everything in the space of a heartbeat. 11 years of quiet, 11 years of a mark that sat on my wrist like an old scar without sensation, and then it was alive, burning up my arm from wrist to elbow, a deep heat that was not pain but was the most present thing I had ever felt in my body, more present than the crowd around me, more present than the screaming that was starting now at the edges of the quay as people understood what had happened. The mark burned, and something opened in me, and I was already kneeling. Myra was unhurt. She was beneath Senna's body, and she was making a sound I had never heard from the child before, not crying, something slower than crying, the particular silence of a child who has just understood that someone chose to stand between her and a thing that meant to kill her. I got my arm around Myra and held her, and she pressed her face into my shoulder, and I looked at the woman on the ground. She was conscious. Her eyes were open, and she was looking at the sky above the quay with the focused attention of someone taking inventory, and I could see the labor in her breathing, controlled, not panicked, the breathing of someone managing pain rather than overcome by it. "The child," she said. Her voice was even. That was the thing that landed on me first, even through everything else, the evenness of her voice, the way her first words upon opening her eyes were those too. "She's here," I said. "She's unharmed." She closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. "Good." Bren was beside me. He said something, a question about the guard, about the far bank, about the investigation, and I heard the words the way you hear words when something more important than words is happening. I registered them and set them aside. I looked at Senna. Her left side had taken the worst of it. I could see this even before my healers confirmed it later, the way she was lying, the angle of it. My healers said afterward that she had turned in the last half-second, a slight rotation that pulled 2 of the 4 arrows away from a path that would have found Myra's head. They said this in the manner of people reporting a fact. I said nothing, because I had seen the moment it happened, and what she did in that half-second was not instinct. It was decision. The difference matters to me, though I could not have explained why. I lifted her myself. This was not a considered action. Bren's hand came toward me to help and I moved past it, because something in me, the bond, the mark still burning on my arm, or only the most basic insistence of a self that had just watched someone take 4 arrows for a child in my care, said that this was mine to do. I gathered her as carefully as I could, her weight shifting against me, and I stood, and I carried her up the quay steps. The crowd on both sides of the stone path went silent. I have walked that path 100 times. I know the sound it makes when it is full, and the sound it makes when it is empty. This was a third sound, not silence exactly, but the held quality of a crowd that is watching something and has understood collectively that it does not yet know what this is, but that it is something. I did not look at any of them. I carried her up to the Citadel's inner ward and I did not put her down. My healers worked through the afternoon. There were 3 of them, and they were good at their work, and they asked me to step back and give them room, and I stepped back exactly as far as the doorway of the room they put her in, and no further. Bren stood in the corridor outside. He did not say anything, which is one of the things I value most about Bren, his ability to understand when speech would be wrong. Lord Kevin arrived at my elbow approximately an hour into the healer's work. Kevin oversees my pack court, which means he is the person I deal with when something requires the machinery of governance to engage with the pack structure directly. He is efficient and precise, and has, as I said, a gift for saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment. He came to the doorway, looked past me at the healers and at the figure on the table, and said, in the measured tone of a man making a practical inquiry, "My lord, the border log lists her as a wanderer. No house, no allegiance. Is there family we should contact?" I turned and looked at him. He looked back at me with the careful attentiveness of a man who is trying to determine from my expression what kind of error he has just made. I said nothing. He took 2 steps back and found something to do elsewhere. There was no family to contact. I did not yet know this with certainty, but I knew it with the thing that is not certainty but is close enough to make certainty feel slow. The bond was not a voice and it was not a memory. It was a direction. It had been giving me that direction since she hit the ground on the quayside, and one of the things it was telling me, quietly and without drama, was that this woman had been walking alone for a long time. Myra came and found me before the evening bell. She appeared at the doorway of the corridor in the way she appeared at most places, suddenly, with complete confidence in her own welcome. And she looked at me, and then at the room beyond, and then at me again. And she came and sat on the bench beside me and put her hand in mine without asking whether this was permitted. We sat like that for a while. She called my name, Myra said after some time. "I know." Before she moved, she looked at me and she said my name. Myra's hand tightened slightly in mine. How did she know my name? "I don't know," I said. "She smells like rivermint. She sells it at the festival stall." "I know, I talked to Fenwick at her stall neighbor's booth." A pause. "Fenwick is a very good listener." "So I've heard." Myra was quiet again. The healers moved inside the room, speaking to each other in low professional voices. The lamp on the table threw a warm light through the open door. "Is she going to be all right?" Myra asked. "Yes," I said. I said it with the certainty I felt, which was the kind of certainty that does not come from the healer's report but from something older. "Yes, she is." Myra nodded, accepting this, and leaned her head against my arm, and we sat until the evening bell rang and I sent her to bed. She went without argument, which was unusual enough that I registered it. She paused at the end of the corridor and looked back at me. "You should eat something," she said, with the authority of a 7-year-old who has decided that the adult in the room requires management. "I will," I said. She went. I did not eat. I sat in the doorway, and after the healers had done all they could do and left the lamp burning and told me she would sleep through the night and wake better, I moved the chair from the corridor into the room and sat beside the window and watched the river light on the water below and did not sleep either. I sent for Dovell before midnight. He came in his coat still smelling of fish and brine, wringing his festival cap in both hands, a man who had clearly been told only that the Alpha King wished to speak with him, and had spent the walk from the quay constructing the range of things this might mean. I asked him about her. He relaxed in the specific way people relax when they understand that they are being asked to help rather than answer for something. He sat down on the cap and told me what he knew. She had appeared at the east end of the quay 3 weeks before the festival, when old Marrett's herb stall went empty because Marrett had taken sick. She had set up quietly and done good trade, not because she pushed her wares on people, but because the quality was there for anyone who paid attention. She was a fair neighbor to him, kept her space tidy, did not crowd, did not compete, called him by his name. She turned down coin twice this week, he said. Once for a woman who came with twins, wanted the mint bundle for the little one's chest cough but had already spent down at the healer's gate. Senna gave her the bundle and wouldn't take payment. Said she had plenty. He paused. She didn't have plenty. I could see her stock from my stall. She had enough to get through the festival and not much beyond. He looked at his hands. And then yesterday there was a boy, river sores on his arms, the kind you get from the lower holds. His family had been at the Citadel healers already and spent what they had. She sat him down and treated the sores herself, right there at the stall, and gave him a jar of something for the rest. Didn't log it. Didn't say anything about it after. He paused again. She'll give something away before she'll watch someone go without. That's the kind of person she is. I sat with that for a moment after he had gone. Then I sat with the river light and the lamp and the sound of her breathing, which was steadier now. And I thought about a woman who had been logging herself as no house, no allegiance for long enough that she had apparently stopped questioning whether the log was accurate, and who gave away her stock before she'd watched someone go without, and who had crossed 3 steps and taken 4 arrows without calculating it. And I thought that the bond had been patient for 11 years. And I thought that, perhaps, patience was the thing it had needed to be. She woke just past the morning bell. I was in the chair by the window. The river outside was beginning to catch the early light, first a gray gleam, then silver, then the particular river gold that comes when the sun clears the eastern ridge. I had been watching it for a while, not thinking exactly, only existing in the way you exist when you have been awake all night, and the thinking part of the mind has finished its work and left behind something quieter. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. This took a moment, the reorientation, the inventory, the return to the body after whatever the body does when it is mending. Then she turned her head and found me in the chair, and she did not startle. This was the thing I noticed. Most people, waking in an unfamiliar room to find a king sitting 3 feet away, would startle. She looked at me the way you look at something that makes sense, even when you haven't yet worked out the reason why, and she said, without preamble, "The child. Unharmed. She's asking to come and sit with you after breakfast." She let out a slow breath. Something in her shoulders settled, not the settling of relief, which tends to be sudden, but the settling of something that had been braced and could now stop being braced. She looked at the ceiling again, then at me. "How many?" she said. 4. She took this in. All of them hit. 2 of them would have found Myra, I said. You turned in the last moment. She was quiet. "Yes," she said finally, "I did." There was no drama in it. She said it as a statement of fact about something that had happened and could not now unhappen, and she returned her attention to the ceiling while she took further stock of herself. A methodical internal review, by the look of it, the kind that someone accustomed to managing their own physical reality runs when they need to know what they are working with. "You knew her name," I said. I'd seen her at the festival before, several times over the past 3 weeks. She adjusted her position slightly, carefully. She bought mint drops from my stall the first week and then stood at my neighbor's booth for 10 minutes telling his cat about the fish she'd seen in the lower holds. The faintest pull at the corner of her mouth. "She's memorable." "She is," I said. The cat listened very seriously. Fenwick. He seemed to find it all quite plausible. He generally does. She looked at me. It was a direct look, not assessing, not performing anything, simply looking, the way someone looks when they are deciding what is true. "You're Aldrin Vale," she said. "Yes." "She called you my Lord Aldrin when she talked about you, Myra, in one of the conversations at my stall." A pause. "She talked about you a great deal. She has opinions." "She has many opinions. She shares all of them." "She told me you eat your fish the wrong way." Senna's expression was still patient, but there was something in it now that had not been there a moment ago, a warmth behind the composure, like light behind glass. "She said you take the skin off first and you should leave it on. She felt strongly about this." She has told me this directly, on multiple occasions. And I take the skin off first. A man of conviction, Senna said, and that was almost a smile, and then it was gone, replaced by the steadiness she wore like a garment. She looked at my wrist. I had not raised it. I had not made any movement in that direction. But she had looked at it, at the mark, which was visible below my cuff in the morning light, the same blue-silver line it had been for 11 years, except that now it had depth, the warmth and depth of something that had stopped being dormant. I watched her face. I know what that is, she said quietly. The bond declared yesterday, I said, when you moved. It has been 11 years. I paused. I want to tell you that plainly so there is no confusion about what has happened. The bond declaring on my end is not a claim on you. It is information. She was looking at my wrist. Then she looked at her own left wrist, which was resting on the blanket. I had not let myself look there. I had spent the night not looking there, because looking would have felt like reaching for something I did not have the right to reach for, and I have learned, in 15 years of being a king, that the things you reach for before you have the right to them tend to break in your hands. There was a mark on her wrist. Blue-silver, the mirror of mine. Not new, not the raw brightness of a mark that had just declared. Settled. The soft-edged permanence of something that had been there long enough to become part of the skin. I looked at her face. 3 months ago, she said, the morning after I crossed your border, she turned her wrist, looking at it. I woke up and it was there. The morning after she crossed the border. The morning after Kievan's registry had logged her as wanderer, no house, no allegiance, and handed her a trader's pass and sent her on her way. 3 months ago, while I was governing Thornville and not expecting anything. Why didn't you? I stopped. I'm sorry, that's not a fair question. No, it's all right, she looked up. I thought about it. I spent some time, more time than I'd like to admit, going back and forth about whether there was any version of walking up to Thornville's gate and saying what I thought I knew. She paused. I'm a planeswalker with no house and no allegiance. I sell Riverman at the festival stall. I sleep in my neighbor's storage room and pay him in herb bundles. She said this without self-pity, as simple description. I was not going to go to the gate and tell the guard that I believed I was the Alpha King's bondmate. I know how that conversation ends. I thought of Kievan's voice in the doorway the previous afternoon. The border log lists her as a wanderer, and I felt the particular discomfort of recognizing that she was right, and that the system I govern had given her every reason to think what she thought. And then yesterday, I said. Yesterday I stopped thinking about how it looked. She was quiet for a moment. There was a child and there were arrows, and the mark had been there for 3 months, and I stopped calculating. You moved. I moved. The morning light was full in the room now, the river gold reaching the far wall. Somewhere in the citadel, the household was beginning its day. I could hear the distant percussion of the kitchens, the voices of the hall staff in the corridor below. The ordinary sound of a place going on, which it does, which it always does, regardless of what has happened the day before. I'd like to tell you something, I said. She waited. In 15 years of governing this kingdom, I have made decisions I'm proud of and decisions I am not. I've tried to know the difference. One of the things I've learned is that the bond, whatever it is, whatever its nature, whether it's destiny or something older, is not itself a reason to do anything. It's a fact, like weather. What you do about it is still a choice. I held her gaze. So I am not going to tell you that the bond has declared and therefore you belong here. That is not what I'm going to say. I paused. I'm going to ask you, separately from all of that, whether you would consider staying. She looked at me for a long time. The steadiness in her face did not change, but something beneath it, something very quiet, seemed to consider. I've been sleeping in Doville's storage room for 3 weeks, she said. He charges me in Riverman. We can do better. That is an extremely low bar. I know, I'm setting it low on purpose. The warmth behind the glass again, briefly. You said the choice was mine. It is. And if I said no, then you would recover here until you were ready to travel, and I would resupply you for the road, and the mark would stay as it is. I looked at the river. It wouldn't change what you did for Myra. She was quiet for a moment. That's a very careful answer. I've been doing this long enough to stop bargaining with what I can't offer honestly. She looked at the mark on her wrist, then at mine, then at me. What does staying look like, she said, practically. It looks however you need it to look, I said. To start with, it looks like a room in the citadel and a proper table for your herbs and whatever time you need to decide what comes after. And Myra. Myra will have opinions about it, I said. She will share them. About the fish. Among other things. Senna looked at the ceiling. Something moved in her face, not the composure shifting, not the warmth, but something below both of them, something I did not yet have a name for. She was quiet for long enough that I stopped expecting an answer and simply waited, which is another thing 15 years of governing has taught me. I'd like to eat something first, she said. That is entirely reasonable. And then I'll tell you. Take your time, I said. I meant it. I stood and went to the door to send for the kitchen, and I did not let myself look back, because some things need to be decided without anyone watching, and I have learned, sometimes the hard way, to give people the room they need for that. Myra arrived after breakfast with the precision of someone who had been waiting in the corridor for a socially acceptable interval, and had decided the interval was over. She came through the door and looked at Senna with the frank appraisal of a child who has been thinking about something and is now in a position to do something about it, and she said, "You knew my name." "I did," Senna said. She was sitting up now, the healers having approved it, and she looked better, still careful in her movements, still managing something, but present in a way that had not been there when she woke. "From the mint drops. And from Fenwick. He listens to you very seriously." Myra climbed onto the chair that I had been sitting in, which she did without asking because she never asks, and she arranged herself in it with the posture of someone settling in for a conversation of some duration. "Fenwick says you have good hands," she said. "For animals. He said he could tell." "That's kind of him." "He's a good judge." Myra's tone was authoritative. "He doesn't like most people. He liked you from the beginning." She paused. "He told me, at the stall, on the first day you were there." I looked at Senna. Senna looked at Myra with something that was, unmistakably, the thing beneath the warmth and beneath the composure, the thing I had not had a name for. She looked at Myra the way you look at something that does not require explaining. "What kind of fish does Fenwick like best?" Senna said. "Bream," Myra said with great certainty. "He always says bream, though I think he would eat anything. Honestly, he just has a preference." "That's respectable." "Fenwick is very respectable." A pause. "Do you like fish?" "I do." "My Lord Aldrin takes the skin off first," Myra said, with the gravity of someone reporting a known failing. "It's wrong. I've told him." "I heard something about that." Myra looked at me. "Did you tell her?" "She already knew." Myra nodded, accepting this, and looked back at Senna. "You're going to stay," she said, not a question. A statement of fact, made with the absolute confidence of a 7-year-old who has decided what is true. Senna looked at her for a moment, then she looked at me. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." She did not say it the way people say things they have been working toward. She said it the way you say something that was already true and has simply been given the chance to become a word. I heard it and felt the mark settle on my wrist, not the burning of the day before, not the urgency, but something that went down into the bones and stayed. I said nothing. I sat in the corridor chair that Myra had vacated when she climbed back down and gone to investigate what the kitchen was sending up, and I let the morning proceed. The investigation into the attack ran in parallel. Bren brought me reports at intervals throughout the day, the arrows recovered from the quayside, the point style identified, the angle of the shot mapped back to a grain loft on the far bank that the city watch had already found and cleared. A coordinated loosing, 4 archers, the target specific. Not random, not opportunistic. I read the reports and gave instructions and let Bren manage the machinery of it, because the machinery of it was his to manage and he was good at it, and because the part of my attention that was not on the investigation was not somewhere I was ready to move it from. By the second evening the trail had reached the eastern delta. By the third morning, Bren had a name. Lord Ureth of the Delta Lowlands. A river lord who had filed a contested wardship claim against my guardianship of Myra 2 years ago, arguing that, as a collateral relation, he had a stronger claim to the child than the crown. The claim had been reviewed and denied by my pack court on 2 grounds. The relation was distant enough that it failed the bloodline threshold, and there was a question of financial interest in the land that Myra would inherit at majority. Ureth had accepted the denial with the public composure of a man who has lost a legal argument and intends to try another way. This was the other way. I dealt with it. I will not recount the details here, because they are the details of governance and not the details of this story, and because I have found in the years since that the thing I most want to remember about those 3 days is not Ureth or the arrows or the legal proceedings that followed. What I most want to remember is the afternoon I spent walking the inner ward's covered gallery with Senna, 2 days after she had woken, when the healers had said she could move carefully, and I had offered her the gallery because it faces the river, and the light there in the afternoon is the best light in the citadel. She walked slowly, with the careful consideration of someone managing a body that is still in negotiation with itself, and I walked beside her, and we talked. This is perhaps not the most dramatic thing I could tell you. I am aware that the gallery walk of a convalescing plainswoman and an alpha king who has not slept more than a few hours in 3 days is not, on its face, the most gripping scene. But I have governed a kingdom for 15 years, and in that time I have sat in council with lords who could command a room and strategists who could hold 5 problems in their heads simultaneously, and diplomats who could make any position sound reasonable. And I have attended state occasions and festivals and formal hunts, and all the elaborate machinery of a kingdom at work. And I can tell you that I have rarely talked to anyone the way I talked to Senna on that gallery in the afternoon light. She talked the way she did everything, without performance, without filling the silence for the sake of filling it, and without making any adjustment for the fact that she was talking to a king. This last thing, I have come to understand, is rarer than it should be. Most people, when they talk to me, are talking to the idea of me, the title, the crown, the pack rank, and the conversation is shaped by that, the words coming through a layer of consideration about what the Alpha King should be told and what he should be allowed to think. Senna talked to me as though I was simply a person in a chair or a person on a gallery, and she was simply a person beside me, and this was a conversation. She had come from the eastern plains, she told me. Her mother had been a healer in one of the River Plain settlements. Not a large settlement, not a notable one. A cluster of houses around a crossing point where the river divided and traders rested between one city and the next. She had learned the herb worked the way most people learn the things their parents know, by being nearby while it happened, by watching hands before she understood why the hands were doing what they were doing, by asking questions and being answered. Her mother had died 4 years ago. Not suddenly, slowly, which is sometimes worse, the way you can see a thing coming and cannot stop it regardless of how clearly you can see it. Senna had been there for it, had managed it, had kept the stall going and the supply trade going, and the work going because the work was what there was, and when it was over she had packed what she could carry and walked. Not running from something, she said. She was looking at the river as she talked, the afternoon light catching the water below the gallery wall. I want to be accurate about that. I wasn't running. I was just not yet finding the place where stopping made sense. And you've been walking since then, I said. 4 years. 3.5. I spent a winter in a delta town. The fishing was good and they needed someone for the herb trade, and it seemed worth staying through the cold. A pause. Then I walked again in the spring. Until you crossed my border. Until I crossed your border. She turned her wrist, looking at the mark. The afternoon light caught it. I woke up the next morning and it was there, and I sat with it for a while before I decided what to think. What did you decide? She looked at me. I decided I would stay for a while and see. For 3 months. I was being careful. Careful about what? She was quiet for a moment, looking at the river. I've been told a lot of things about where I fit, she said. In a lot of places. The Plains people have a word for someone like me. I don't know if there's an equivalent in Thornville's tongue. A person who is between settlements, between places. It's not an insult exactly, but it carries a weight. The assumption that if you haven't found where you belong by now, you probably don't belong anywhere in particular. She paused. I've heard that assumption from enough people in enough places that I'd learned to be slow about letting myself want anything, about deciding that a place was mine. She looked at me. I didn't want to want this and then have it go wrong. I looked at the river. I've been waiting 11 years for the mark to do something, I said. Around year 7 I stopped expecting it to. I kept governing and I kept the border, and I took in Myra when her father died, and I told myself that some kings don't have mates, and that was a fact about the world and not a wound. I paused. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand who you're dealing with. I'm not a man who has been kept whole by hope. I stopped hoping around year 8, but I kept going. She looked at me for a long moment. That's not nothing, she said. No, I said, I suppose it isn't. I kept going too, she said, just differently. Yes, I said, I can see that. We stood at the gallery wall for a while. Below, the river moved the way it always moves, without pause, without choosing, simply going where it has always been going. The afternoon light was long now, the shadows stretching across the stone quay. The festival was gone, my guard had cleared the grounds after the attack, and the investigation had been going for 2 days, and the stalls were empty and the quay was quiet. It would fill again. These things always fill again. The storage room, Senna said. Yes. I should go back and collect my things. Dovell will be wondering. I'll send Bren with you. I don't need. I know, I'll send him anyway. I looked at her. He'll feel better for it. He has spent 3 days not being able to do anything useful, and it is making him difficult. Something in her expression relented. All right. And I'll have a table made for the herbs, I said. Tell me what size. She looked at me. You don't have to. I know, I said. What size? She looked at the river. Something in her face was doing the thing it did, the warmth coming up from below the composure, the thing beneath the glass. Long enough for 3 drying racks, she said, finally, and with a shelf underneath for the pottery jars. The jars are heavy. Long table, shelf underneath, 3 drying racks, I said. I'll have it made. She nodded. She looked at the river for another moment, and then she looked at me, and whatever she saw there, I do not know. I am not always certain what I present to the world seemed to settle something in her. I want to stay, she said. I told Myra I'm telling you, she paused. I've been telling myself for 3 months that I was being careful. I think I was being afraid. Those aren't the same thing. No, I said, they're not. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Not as a declaration, as a simple statement of something she had just discovered to be true. The river moved below us. The afternoon went gold, and then softer, and the first cool came off the water the way it comes in the last days before the cold sets in. And we stood there on the gallery for a while longer before she said she was getting tired, and I walked with her back inside. I called the court on the 4th morning. Not for ceremony, not for proclamation, not yet, not in the formal sense with all the weight that carries. I called them because the Urith matter was resolved and the court needed to know, and because there was something I wanted them to see. Urith was in my custody. His 4 archers had been found in the grain loft. The contested wardship would go before the Pack Court's legal assembly in 30 days, where it would be reviewed with the full weight of the documentation. But the outcome was not in serious question. What had been done to Myra was criminal by every measure Thornville's law provided, and the law would do what it does. I told them all of this. I told them plainly and in order, the way I always do, because I find that the court functions better when it is given the facts directly rather than having to construct them from suggestion. The hall was full, all the Pack lords, the River Clan representatives, the hall officers, the Citadel's senior staff. The long Riverstone Hall, with its carved pillars and its river-facing windows, was lit by the morning light and by the torches in the iron rings along the walls, and it smelled as it always smells. Stone and beeswax and the faint river cold that comes through the window gaps even in summer. Senna stood at my right. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn at the festival, clean now, mended by the Citadel's household seamstress with a precision that matched the fabric's original work, which told me the seamstress had taken care. She wore them without apology, which is the only way to wear them, and she stood with the unhurried self-possession she brought to everything. A woman who had decided some time ago that she was what she was, and had stopped needing that to be otherwise. I told the court about Urith. I told them about the investigation and its resolution and the legal proceedings to follow. I told them that Myra was well and that the wardship was confirmed and would not be questioned again in this assembly. I let the hall process that. Then I stopped. 3 days ago, I said into the silence, a woman with no house and no allegiance and no pack standing walked into an attack on my ward and put herself between Myra and 4 arrows. She did not know whose ward Myra was. She did not calculate what it would cost. She moved. I paused. My mark declared at the moment of impact. It has been 11 years since this mark gave any sign. It declared on the quayside in front of the whole festival, and it has not stopped since. The hall was very quiet. I looked at Lord Kevin. He was standing in his customary position at the front of the Pack Lord Assembly, and he was looking at Senna with the expression of a man assembling what he knows into an order that makes sense. I watched him look at her wrist, the mark visible, as mine was visible, both of them the same blue-silver settled line. I watched him look at my wrist. I watched him look back at her. He bowed. Not a managed bow. Not the small, efficient inclination of a court official performing a courtesy. The full bow of a Pack Lord acknowledging a Luna, the bow that goes down to the knee, the bow that does not come back up until the acknowledged party gives it permission. He went down before the rest of the hall had finished understanding what was happening, and the motion of it rippled outward. 1 lord, then 2, then the River Clan representatives, then the hall officers, then all of them. The long wave of it moving through the room like the river moving over stones, steady and unhurried and complete. It happened because the bond was plain, because the marks were visible, because Kevin's knee was on the floor, and in Thornville when the Pack Lord bows, the court knows what it means. I looked at Senna. She was watching the hall. I want to be precise about what I saw in her face, because I have thought about it many times since and I do not want to misremember it. It was not triumph. It was not vindication, not the satisfaction of having been proved right to people who doubted. It was something quieter than any of those things. It was the look of a person who has been told, by an entire room, something that they had been told in small ways by individual people before, by Dovell, by the twins' mother, by the boy with the river sores, by Fenwick the cat, by Myra at the mint drop stall, and who is now being told it in a large way, all at once, by more people than she has ever been in a room with at the same time. The look of a person who is hearing, for the first time, that the list was wrong. She nodded once, very slightly. The Pack Lord rose and the hall rose with him. Afterward, when the court had cleared and the hall had returned to its ordinary work, I walked with Senna out to the gallery above the river. Myra had materialized somewhere near the hall doors and attached herself to Senna's other side, and the three of us walked out into the afternoon light together, which was not what I had planned but which seemed, as most things involving Myra seem, to be what was actually happening. We stood at the gallery wall. Below, the quay was quiet, the festival fully cleared now, the stone path empty. In a few weeks the cold would come and the river would run gray and low, and the city would turn inward in the way it does in winter, and the hall fires would be lit through the day, and it would be a different kind of beautiful. Myra said she was going to find Fenwick and left. Senna and I stood at the wall. "Kevin came to see me this morning," she said. I looked at her. "He came to the ward before the court assembly. He said he had reviewed the border log from 3 months ago." She paused. "He apologized." "Did he?" "He didn't have to do that." "No," I said, "he didn't." She was quiet, looking at the river. "I've thought about this," she said, "about what it means when people see you a certain way for long enough. I don't think Kevin is a bad man. I think he looked at the log, wanderer, no house, no allegiance, and he saw a category, not a person. I've been a category in a lot of places." She turned her wrist, looking at the mark. "I thought about that this morning, sitting in the ward. How long I've been a category." "What did you think?" I said. "I thought," she said slowly, "that it doesn't matter now, what they logged me as, what the category was." She looked at the river. "The list is made by people who don't know what they're looking at. That's what I told you the other day. I still believe it." She paused. "But I think I also needed to hear something else, something the list didn't say, and I think—" She stopped. I waited. "I think I've been hearing it," she said, "for a while now, in pieces." She looked at me. Doval, the woman with the twins, the boy at the stall, Myra and the cat. The pull at the corner of her mouth, the almost smile. And then a room full of people this morning. "The room full of people was rather a lot at once," I said. "It was," she agreed, "but it was the same thing they all said, just louder." The river moved below us. The light was on the water, doing what river light does, the same motion and the same change and the same river. "I'm going to need to go back to the plains," she said. "At some point, not to leave, to collect what I left." A pause. "My mother's herb records. There are things I dried last summer that are stored at the crossing settlement. A few personal things." "I'll send an escort." "You don't have to." "I know," I said. "I'll send one." She looked at me. The warmth was there now, not behind the glass but at the surface, the part of her that had stopped being managed and was simply present, and I thought that I would spend a long time learning what that face meant when it was fully at rest, and that I was very willing to spend that time. "The table," she said. "The table. Has it been started?" "The woodworker begins tomorrow," I said. "Long enough for 3 drying racks, shelf underneath." "Good." She looked at the river. "I'll want to set up before the cold properly comes. The drying takes longer in cold air." "I'll tell him to work quickly." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked at me fully, directly, the way she had looked at me that first morning in the healer's room when she had opened her eyes and found me in the chair and had not startled. "Thank you," she said, "for the chair." I was already there. "I know, that was the part that was—" She stopped. "I don't have the word for it." "Neither do I," I said. "I just knew I wasn't going anywhere." She looked at me for another moment. Then she turned back to the river, and I felt her hand settle over mine on the gallery wall, not reaching for it, not placing it, simply settling there the way something settles when it has found its place. The mark on my wrist went warm. Below us the river went on, wide and steady and going where it had always been going. Somewhere behind us in the citadel, Myra was talking to a cat about fish. The light was on the water. I had governed this kingdom for 15 years and kept its border and raised a child who had decided very early that I needed managing. And I had done all of it with the mark on my wrist sitting, quiet as an old scar. And I had not been unhappy. Not exactly. Only incomplete in the particular way you are incomplete when you stop expecting the thing that is missing to arrive. I had been wrong to stop expecting. Not because the bond had finally declared, not because the mark was warm, not because a room full of people had gone to their knees that morning, but because of what she had said to Dovell about the twins' mother and the boy with the sores, and because of the way she had moved on the quayside, and because of the first morning when she had opened her eyes and said the child before she said anything else. I covered her hand with mine. The river light was on the water. That, I thought, was exactly enough.